Hi, how are
Okay,
you?
amazing. Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Awesome. I appreciate you just giving me the opportunity to do this interview. I watched the docu-series and it really pulled on a lot of heartstrings. Not to say that, this was my first time knowing the story, but just listening to what everybody was saying and listening to the audio. So I really do appreciate you allowing me to spread awareness about it, more awareness about it. Um, so when you first arrived in Jonestown, what were your initial thoughts about the environment and in the community?
In actuality, I realized that it was the message that he had delivered to us as to what we could expect in Jonestown was far from the truth. In fact, it was the total opposite. And I recognized immediately that this was some form of concentration camp or a slave plantation. Because when you first enter into the gates of Jonestown, there were armed security guards bearing rifles. And although he indicated and told us that it was for our protection so that people would not come into the area and perhaps loot, and also because there were so many wild forms of animals out there that we weren't accustomed to in the United States. This is why they had these weapons. However, within less than 3 to 4 hours, I recognized that that too was also a lie. So I would say my first impression was utter shock and the fact that I had to find a way to get out of what I had gotten into.
Right. And before you guys got to Jonestown, what did he make it seem like it was going to be like?
Well, he told us it was going to be a utopian society free from law enforcement, and each family would have their own individual home. We would not have to work anymore. We would just be able to live off of the crops that were grown there in Jonestown, and
Mm,
that we would live in peace and harmony with no interference. And at any point in time, if we wanted some of our extended family members who were not members of People's Temple to come and visit, they could do so. And in fact, even if they wanted and decided they wanted to live there with us, they would be more than welcome to stay on board.
right.
And again, that was the farthest thing from the truth as well.
Wow. And when did you escape and how did you escape Jonestown?
Well, my escape occurred approximately 3 months after being there, almost 3 months. But I started my plan um, immediately upon entry to Jonestown, or I should say into Georgetown, when they first took my passport. That was a
Uh,
red flag because I knew that we were told by the um, consulate office and also by um, the passport service that we were not to give our passports to anyone. Um, and so that bothered me. And when I suddenly realized I didn't have any US dollars because they took all of our money from us. So I immediately started to be one of their procurers. So I would go out and I'd have US dollars to bargain with the Guyanese citizens in Georgetown, which is the capital. So in doing so, I would bargain some really good prices for things. And then what I would do is pocket the remaining US dollars. So ultimately, I befriended a few Guyanese people in Georgetown. And I followed the phone lines. Although I was just 18, I was well aware of what a telephone line should look like or what I thought a telephone line should look like. So I started following them and seeing which direction, which homes they were going to. So I picked one home, knocked on the person's door, and I said, I know you don't know me. I'm from the United States. I want to know if you have a telephone. I'd like to make a call back to United States Collect, and I will pay you US dollars to do so. Well, because the country is so financially deprived, the Guyanese citizen was happy to let me use their phone. So we became friends, but I told her that if any other United States people came and asked if anyone had visited, she had to promise me that she wouldn't tell them. And I told her at some point I may ask her as well to stay on her veranda, which is an outside area that was in front of her house, um, so I could get to the airport and to the embassy to try and get out of there. So I made contact, numerous contacts with my family who was still in the United States. And at that time, my parents were both in Miami, and their responsibility was to greet some of the People's Temple members before they took the next plane, which was usually KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, to go into Georgetown.
Mm.
So one day, Jim Jones had announced that he was going to go back to United States. And so he said, your mother hasn't heard from you. And I think that you should write her a letter or something so that she knows that you're okay. And I told
Mm.
him that was a great idea. But all along, when we were having our meetings and whatnot, I had been advising my family via phone what was going on so that they could let the media know here in the United States. And he kept trying to figure out how this information was leaking, and he never suspected me, one of his counselors, as doing that very thing that he was trying to figure out. So that was when I realized, too, well, he's not a prophet and he doesn't really know what's going on. So when just before they got ready to leave, I had written a letter. And the contents in that letter told my mother to come to Georgetown. It gave her the address on Lamahawk Gardens where I was staying, and I advised her to come with US dollars. I told her I didn't have my passport. They had taken my passport and my daughter's passport and my then husband's passport. So none of us had our passports. So she needed to bring as much cash as she could so that we could garner our way out of there. So I gave the letter. I looked amongst Jim Jones's group that was going back to the United States, and they were going to stop off in Florida. And they told me they would see my parents there. So I had to make a decision as to who I could entrust this letter to, because certainly if they would have found out the contents of the letter, I would have immediately been shipped to Jonestown and never heard from again. So I decided to give it to his adopted son, the black son, Jimmy Jones Jr. So when I gave him the letter, I said, Jimmy, you and I have been friends for a long time. And if you love me, you will give this letter to my mother. It's very personal. So I'm asking you, please don't read it because it's something I personally want to have a conversation that's confidential with my mother. So would you please give it to her, and don't let anybody else see it. I'm giving it to you. You give it directly to her when she meets you all at the airport. Well, when my dad and my mother did meet them at the airport, Jimmy Jones Jr. handed my mother a letter. And my mother was
Mm.
smart enough because she had heard I was calling the United States, but we didn't have cell phones. So, of course, I couldn't reach her directly. So she immediately put it in her bra. And so Jim Jones looked at Jimmy Jones and he said, "What is that you gave her?" And he said, "It was a letter from Yolanda. Did you read it? Did you read it?" And he said, "Yeah, I read it. It's okay." But my mother overheard him. And my
Mm.
mother told me that he would have had to have fought her. And she knew if he would have fought her, my dad would have immediately stepped in and there would have been some serious problems. So Jim Jones just told Jimmy, "Okay, I just want to make sure everything was okay." And he goes, "Yeah, it's fine." Well, my mother followed everything that I stated in the letter. And I guess within Jim Jones never went back to any further into the United States. He decided to come back, the coward that he was. He would not come to San Francisco to face the charges. So he wound up coming right back. When he came back, I was scared beyond belief because I said, "Oh my God, he knows that I got this letter to my mother." Well, fortunately, that was not the case. And my mother wound up coming to Guyana approximately 7 to 8 days later. And it was very funny because I was just sitting on the outside veranda of the house
Mhm.
in Lamaha Gardens. And suddenly I saw this taxi cab drive up. A little guy in East Van got out of the cab and he goes, "Is this the place where it's a U.S. missionary project?" And so I was so irritated and upset because I really didn't want to be there. I had my daughter in my lap and I said, "Who wants to know?" And he said, "Well, I have a lady here and she says she's looking for her daughter." It still didn't dawn on me that it could be my
Right.
mother. And so suddenly, when I saw her get out of the cab, I left my daughter on the veranda and there was this staircase. It probably was about 30 steps. I leaped so many steps. I think it took me all of 4 steps to get down 30 steps. And I went running into her arms. And the only thing I could say to her is that don't give them your cash, don't give them your passport, don't tell them anything. Tell them we want to leave. We got to get out of here. We got to get out of
Mhm.
here. And I would just kept babbling and babbling. My mother kept saying, "Calm down, calm down." I said, "No, you don't know. You don't know what's going on. Please, please, we got to go. We got to go." So it was a period of approximately, I'd say, no more than 2 to 3 weeks that she had to stay there with me until finally I was able to have a conversation with Jim Jones. And I told him, and my mother concurred, and my then husband, that we wanted to leave. We no longer wanted to be in Georgetown or in Jonestown. We just didn't want to be in Guyana at all. We wanted to come
Right.
back. And
And
I
that's scary.
Oh, yeah, it was very scary, but I told him, you're concerned about all this bad press and everything. If you let us leave and people see us returning, the media and everyone else can be sidetracked into the belief that no one is being held here against their will. Everyone is free to come and go at will. Well,
Mhm.
apparently, when we were doing this negotiations, I caught him at the right time because, of course, he was taking all type of drugs. It was a horrible, horrible situation. However, we were able to convince him that it was in the best interest to let us be the one family that would come back prior to all of the other members going over to Georgetown. So he let us go and they returned our passports and gave us the tickets to go back, return back to United States.
Mhm.
However, there was a agreement that was made, and the agreement was that we would have to continue to go to all church services in San Francisco. We would have to agree not to tell anyone what was actually going on there in Georgetown. We would have to keep quiet. If anybody asks us anything, we were to tell them that it's a beautiful place and they should go there and enjoy the new environment that had been established for the members. So, based upon those agreements, and also with an understanding that if we did talk, he would
Mhm.
have us taken care of, and that would have been what the people who he called the angels, who were really
Right.
nothing but modern day killers for
Right.
doing whatever he told them to do. So we agreed to
And
those conditions.
right.
And yeah, so that's how we were able to get out of Georgetown and Guyana.
Right. Well, thank you for telling your story, Yolanda. I'm glad I got a chance to hear your perspective and what happened to you. And I'm so glad that you made it out and are able to tell your story. I know we have about 30 seconds left. I
Mhm.
have one last question, and it's what advice would you give to others about recognizing and protecting themselves from manipulative leaders?
Well, my advice would be for anyone is to be very cautious when someone tries to um, overshadow you and tell you exactly what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Ultimately, you have to maintain your individuality and also to be very careful when you're in an organized group of any kind. Because if you cannot maintain your own personal identity, that should draw some red flags for you that perhaps this is not the particular organization or group you want to be associated with. And history does repeat itself. So be very cautious, because just like there was a Jim Jones, there was a Hitler, and there were so many others. And I also would say that the one thing that I would caution them to also look at is to don't believe everything you're told. Read for yourself, study for yourself. That's the most important thing you can do to protect yourself from these type of criminals, because that's all he
Yeah,
was a modern day criminal.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Yolanda. I really appreciate it. Thank you to the staff. Thank you to the team for allowing me this opportunity. I appreciate it so much. And I will definitely spread the word and about your advice because it's important.
Thank you. Thank you.